It's Ellen again, and I've got a watercolour project here, which is based on a pineapple for us all to try today. I've drawn the pineapple on a piece of paper, used quite a basic oval shape for the fruit of the pineapple. You do have to be careful because obviously the sides are not going to be square. There's going to be little bumps where the edges of the diamonds come out where they're raised. Also, with the image that I have, the top of the pineapple is about halfway between the top and the bottom of my drawing, so it's almost a drawing of two halves. Again, with the leaves at the top, you need to really observe what they're doing. They're not all going to fan out exactly the same angle. They're not all going to have exactly the same widths or arc. So again, it's all about observation and getting those details right. Okay, so this is a really nice project actually, because it's quite loose and you don't have to be too precise or careful with it. What we're going to do is we're going to use a technique called wax resist, where we use a white candle and we rub it onto our drawing where we want to keep the paper clean. My dogs come in to see what we're doing, as always. My daughter's doing excellent camera work again. So I'm trying not to do the same mark in every square. I'm just roughly putting a highlight in where I roughly want it, and this will help to give texture to the pineapple. Also, to give some extra texture to the leaves, I can also rub some of the candle wax onto the leaves as well. Now the idea with this is that where the wax leaves a oily, waxy residue, and the paper is shiny, the watery paint won't sit on top of the wax, so it will leave the paper coming through basically. Okay, so I'm going to start doing my first layer of paint. So I'm going to mix a yellow here on my palette, and I'm going to knock it back with a little bit of purple that I've already mixed using the red and the blue. I only want a tiny amount. And then I want it to be really quite watery. So I'm going to put lots and lots of water in there. So it's nice and watery, nice and thin. And then I'm going to lay it on my pineapple picture. And because most of the picture, both of the colours are based in yellow, it doesn't really matter if you put them slightly in not quite the right place, because that yellow will then blend into the red and into the green that we're using. So I'm just lightly touching the yellow paint onto the pineapple. I don't want a solid wash, so I'm just adding little bits here and there. This is wet paint onto dry paper. You can see sometimes the paint won't sit on the paper, and that's because of the candle wax that's been put on there. So we don't need to be precise in this picture at all. I apologise, my dog's being very noisy. Okay. If there's any bits that we've missed, we can always add them in later. And now as a base under the leaves, I'm going to add some yellow. Quite loosely. These will be highlights later on in the picture. Brighter flashes in with the other greens, like that. Okay, so now we want to put in some darker definition into the pineapple. So what I'm going to do, a little bit naughty, adding a little bit of red into the yellow I've already got, making an orange colour. A bit more yellow. And what happens is, as each of your layers gets added to your pineapple, they each get darker and thicker every time. Don't want to go too dark too quickly, because that will make the painting look heavy. Add a bit more water in there. It's got like a nice orangey colour. And what you do now is, if the yellow is still wet, which you might be, is you start to drop it into the yellow and onto the white paper that you haven't yet covered. And what happens is where the wet paint touch each other, they will bleed into each other. And that's very much what this picture is all about. It's different paints and colours blending together. Creating the textures that you want on your pineapple. Mine's from an image. I mean, it's better really from life, as always. Just dropping orange into that yellow that's already wet, and that will then blend in nicely, adding a little bit of definition, adding the pattern to the pineapple. I'm trying to keep the shadow to the bottom of the diamonds because that's where the shadow would be. If there's any bits that you don't want to touch, for instance, I don't want the orange bit to touch that orange bit, you leave a gap like that. As you can see, being quite free with it. If there's anything you don't like, anything that you've put in the wrong place, you just make your brush thirsty. So for instance, you squeeze it out with your cloth, and then you can then pick that paint right back up again and lift it away. How much paper you leave is up to taste, really. If you think, do you know what, I'm not comfortable having that much paper left, I'm going to put more yellow on, then that's fine. It's okay. I'm running out of my orange, so I'm going to make a little bit more. A bit of yellow. The yellow has been knocked back with a little bit of purple already. So I don't need to knock back the orange because it's already knocked back. Too much red. So a bit more yellow. And then some more water. Make it about the same thickness and consistency as it was before, otherwise it looks strange. There's more shadow on this side now, so I'm going to add more darker areas. As you may have guessed, this is not a realistic pineapple. It's more of an artistic impression, this one. I'm going to put a little bit of shadow in underneath where the stalks would be. and a little bit at the base of the pineapple. If your paint runs and becomes paler, and the more you put in, the more it runs, don't worry, just let it dry, and you can put another darker layer on later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to treat this as a painting of two halves, really. I'm going to let this side dry, and now I'm going to work some more on the top half. So obviously my yellow is my first colour that I put on. So put some yellow in there. I'm not going to worry, there's a little bit of red in there because the red will knock back the green. I'm going to put some green in with my yellow. Okay, so I'm going to add some water into the green. The yellow is, the green's already knocked back by the red. So I'm going to get quite a pale limey green and add some water to it. And then add my green into the leaves here. Now, normally I would say start from the middle and go outwards, but because you want to think quite carefully about the points of your leaves, I would start at the end and then bring them round to the bottom of your pineapple. Like that. And it just makes the tips of your leaves a little bit more considered. Don't have to be too careful about it, because this is a nice free part of this picture. Now for this one, because it's a long swoop, I put my arm on the table to give myself a little bit of extra stability. You can just see the colours starting to layer up with those leaves there. Now this is a tricky one. I'm going to go this way to start with, and then I'm going to come out from the middle, join the two together. I don't like going this way as much. There we go. I'm going to start to introduce the more bottle green. So the paler green is a leaf green, and this green more of a bottle green. I think in this pack it's called Viridian. I'm just going to start to introduce some of these darker tones, and this will be wet on wet, so the two will blend in together. This leaf here I want to keep quite light, so I'm going to paint around it at the moment. You can see this different shades starting to layer again at the top of the plant, at the top of the pineapple. Okay, so it starts to add description and shade into your picture. Just tidy that up a little bit, it's bothering me. Right, okay, so back down to the pineapple, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to soften some of this orange and put a little bit more yellow. Now what we can do, because this is a watercolour, we can put a little bit of very pale neat yellow onto this pineapple, and it will give it just a tiny bit of brightness in the middle of the segments, and just warm them up a little bit. So I'm just going to dab a little bit on there, and you can see the contrast. Oh, sun's out. Lovely. Again, leaving the highlights onto the left hand side. So the light's coming from the same direction again. a little bit more, warmed it up just a little bit more. Put a touch in here. As you can see, it's quite a loose painting really. Okay, so going to make some more orange and make this much darker, because we want another dark tone to go on top of the orange that we've already got to give it more definition. You can put a tiny bit of blue in there just to make it not quite so bright. That's starting to get a little bit brown. I don't know if I want brown exactly. There's a tiny bit more red in there. Okay, so now again we're going to be using where the paint is already wet, but we're going to be thinking about it. For instance, I'm not going to put any in here because there's a huge puddle of paint there and it will just get lost in there. So I'm going to go with some bits that are damp but not very wet. I'm just going to drop it in, touch it in, and as you can see, some good contrast going on. You can see this, the shadows starting to form with this brown, just very delicately touching it in the right areas. Creating some contrast. I'm putting the side of here so it doesn't go into all of that. You can describe the sort of raised part in the middle of the diamond as well. Remember, we're not going for lots of detail, we're going for texture. Now the picture that Seasons has given us is quite bright and there's quite a lot of red in there. So we're going to have the odd flash of red in the pineapple as well. So taking this red here, this is some red that I've already knocked back with a bit of green. I'm just going to put a little bit more in, being very bad mixing my colours, making them dirty. So a flash of red there. I'm going to put a little bit of water in, but not too much. I do want the red to be quite strong, otherwise it will just blend into the brown and the orange and make no difference. Okay, so the red instantly makes particular bits stand out and just lifts particular bits of the pineapple. You don't want it everywhere. This is just an extra sort of hint to make it all a bit stronger. A bit more in there. Got a strong flash over here. Again, being really quite loose. Using the brush stroke to create rough texture. It's getting paler and paler, it's getting more similar to the brown at the bottom. I may just put a little bit of brown in with it to give it that extra shade at the bottom. Again, I may do that in another coat in a minute. Now, also, there are some flashes of red in the leaves because it's important to make the picture balanced and to have the same hint of brightness in the top and in the bottom, otherwise it looks sort of weird and unbalanced. So I'm going to put a few flashes of red. So I'm going to do the end of my leaf quite carefully, and then I'm going to sweep it round like that. This one, the end isn't quite so careful, so I'm going to be a bit more free with that. Now there wasn't a lot of paint in that one, so I'm going to go over it again. Just drop the paint in and it will automatically go where it's wet, like that. Put some in here. That's still wet there, that's fine. It's lovely if it bleeds in. I might actually drop a little bit of water in there and let that bleed like that, and then a little bit under here as well. Now where the dark green and the red blend, can also make almost a grey or a shadow because they are complementary colours, opposite colours. If you mix them together too much, they will create a brown. Okay, I'm going to add some more greens into my leaves. So I'm going to start with some leaf green. Knocked back a little bit of red that's already in there. I'm just going to make the colour that bit more bright. So I'm going to leave that white part there, that highlight, and keep that right hand side green, and then I'm going to make this more intense. It's a bit wishy-washy at the moment. Now luckily, where I interrupted the red that I just painted in, it's actually joining itself up together, so we're very happy about that. Drop it in together and mend the gap like that. Okay, so now the last thing to do with your pineapple is to add some green as a bit of a contrast on the fruit part of your pineapple. So I'm going to start with some leaf green, starting pale. Now again, with the red, this is an opposite colour, so the red and the green will make it stand out and become more, create brightness in your picture. I'm going to get some more green, make that a bit stronger. Drop that colour in there like that, and with the green you can start to create some of the texture of some of the little sprouts and mounds that come out of the pineapple. So this green, really, this and the darker green that I'm going to put on in a minute, are almost like the details. It's a little bit wet at the moment. Can always come back to that. Yeah, where it's a bit wet, I'm going to come back a bit later and drop some more colour in, like that. So now I'm going to put some bottle green in, This last bottle green, I decided to add some blue to it to make it a little bit more turquoisey. And then we can start to put a little bit more definition again into pineapple, but this really is the last final touches. Again, using where the paint is still wet, you can drop your little marks in, but they will blend in nicely. And again, it just picks up the pineapple, gives it a little bit more definition. Less really is more. Very light flicky touch to do this. Just seeing if there's any more bits that really aren't very defined. There's a couple of leaves at the bottom, which I'm going to put in, and maybe I'll put some leaf green in there as well. Look a little bit odd just being bluey green. Little sprouty bits on the side of your pineapple, and then I'm going to add some of this bottley green to the leaves as well to give them more punch and a bit more definition. That's the word. And you can see the candle wax also interfering in how the paint is reacting on the paper. There's broken sort of natural white bits that are coming through. So yeah, this green really gives you the definition that your pineapple needs. And it's getting a bit pale. And I can make these bits darker around this leaf that I wanted to keep quite pale to give me my contrast. This leaf here is bothering me, so I'm going to just smooth this out. That's a nice thing with watercolour. You can use your brush, you can push it around, you can make it softer, you can lift it up. Now it's gone too pale, so I'm going to go back in with some paint, and I'm just going to go over that line again. Like that, to make it more distinct. Tidy that up as well there. Okay, for a last flourish, I'm going to put a little bit more red in the top because they're just not bright enough for me. I'm just dropping the red in again on top of the wet line that's there already. And there you go, there you have it, your pineapple.